Hello everyone, how are we doing on a Wednesday night at 9:01 p.m.? I'm normally not recording at this time. We had some crazy weather today. We had power outages here in my neighborhood. Power went out around 11:30 this morning, and as I was prepping this document, it didn't come on until about 7:30 at night while I was at my son's baseball game. Just got back. Got them in their bedtime routine, and I wanted to record this. At least if I can record it tonight, I can get it to you for tomorrow so you can kill some time at work, because this stuff is interesting stuff. In our second module, we are doing commitment and consistency. Now, Cialdini bunches both of these together. They're not the same thing. Okay, and he does spend more time on commitment than he does on consistency throughout the second chapter, or actually it's the third chapter in the book. Right, but they're not the same thing. Sorry about that. Broadly speaking, as humans, we have strong societal and cultural pressures to be consistent on a continual basis. We value consistency. If someone's irregular, if someone is up and down all the time, that's usually not someone we like as much. Someone who's more even, someone who consistently behaves the same way, that is more valued at society. Tomorrow when you're at work, or when you're listening to this at work tomorrow, think of the people that work around you, and think of their behavior, and think about the people that you like, and think about the people that you have a difficult time getting along with. And then think about what Cialdini said about consistency. And you'll notice some patterns there. Okay? So let me get straight to the questions. Now, I really appreciate the level of detail that have been going into these topical updates. Some of them have been really, really interesting. I highly suggest that the class do jump in on a number of these and post some comments, because they are rather interesting. So what I did on some of them is I actually have a couple notes here prior to the questions, so I kind of remember the topical update and I go into the question. All right? So this topical update was specifically about the foot in the door technique. All right? Does this principle only work if there are two requests in sequence, one small and one larger? Or can it be a lasting effect where compliance remains as demands grow and grow and grow? Well, it mostly works. It doesn't have to be two requests, but you need some initial commitment, and usually that initial commitment is a small one, and that is the foot in the door. How many that follows that is unknown. It could be 2, it could be 3, it could be 6. But the important thing is that you get some sort of initial commitment, and usually it's a small one, and then you build from there. Is the force that drives people to behave consistently similar to that of cognitive dissonance? That's actually a pretty good question. Cognitive dissonance is something that humans do not like. We try to avoid thinking uneasily, cognitive dissonance, as much as we possibly can, to the point where we'll almost make up a narrative in our head, we call that coping behavior, to get us through something where there's cognitive dissonance. And every one of you that are listening to this has done this. For instance, you made a purchase, you either rushed it, or you didn't have good enough information about that purchase, or you may have overpaid for that purchase. Soon thereafter, you found out you made a poor choice, or you made the wrong choice, or you paid too much. And then in order to get rid of that cognitive dissonance that you have, that bad taste in your mouth, you cognitively tell yourself another story, i.e., well, this was bonus money, it wasn't really that big of a deal anyway, so what? I may have paid too much, but who cares? Oh, it's no problem, I'll use it, and then I'll give it as a gift, and blah, 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 blah. You give yourself a narrative for coping behavior to get rid of the dissonance. So, we strive consistency, and when something is inconsistent, you could call that cognitive dissonance. You could call that uneasiness dissonance. So we have to figure out ways to get rid of the dissonance, because all humans do not like cognitive dissonance. Humans like consistency. So here is a stimulus from a topic talk before I go into the question. And the topic talk was specifically talking about subscriptions and how companies should use subscriptions as a way for commitment. And if part of the subscription, they could get them to then, if they're already subscribed, to get other people to commit as well. As a salesperson, if someone used a defensive mechanism on you, what would your response be to still try to close the sale? Well, as a sales professor and as someone who is a student of the professional selling literature, really when it comes down to, there are techniques that salespeople do, but if a salesperson is truly doing something that is in the best interest, that you find out what people want and you give it to them, and what you have, is a benefit for the individual you're trying to talk to. If they use a defense mechanism because they think, they're not thinking through the deal. If you tell people what they want, and it's really what they want, and you can give it to them at a fair price, you can avoid the defense mechanisms. But in reality, in the book or in the topic talk, we call them defense mechanisms. Salespeople call them objections. There are multiple techniques, overcoming objection techniques, that you could use. But you only close the sale if you know the other party is going to say yes. If you think you're going to get a no, you don't go to close. Because good salespeople only close once. Bad salespeople close too soon, close too early, and they continually try to close. And if you continually try to close, and then the buyer realizes that, hey, this salesperson here is trying to get me to close, and no. I try to close once and only once. I ask once and only once. And I only ask if I think I'm going to get a yes. Or I'm pretty sure I'm going to get a yes. According to the article, I think some of the actions in the article are adverse with the rule of reciprocation, such as signing up first and not recommending the rule benefit to your customers. Are the tool rules contradictions? So the question really is reciprocity in complete contradiction to consistency? Or commitment, really. Actually, this is about commitment. The answer is no. I don't think I would call them in contradictions. Just sidebar comment. We're going to go through 6+ things in this book this semester, right? They're not 6 independent things. You're going to see substantial overlap in many of the 6. I think reciprocity and commitment has some overlap. Now, reciprocity falls under that golden rule, correct? The interesting thing about reciprocity is usually someone does an action first and they expect something in return. Okay? When you're looking at commitment tactics, usually it's the individual that does something first, the one who's trying to persuade. So here you have something, it could be a small ask. And that small ask is how you build the commitment to then go forward. Once someone says yes, it's hard for them to change their mind. Once you do a favor for someone, it's almost impossible, given the golden rule and the social pressure that you have, to not return that favor. I don't see them as contradictions. I see them more similar than not. Okay. So we have a couple topic talks tonight that veer into the space of branding. Okay? I'm going to go into these questions and then I'll tell you exactly what I'm talking about. What effects do we see if a company or an individual makes too big of a commitment up front and their consistency falters? Will it lead to a complete failure, or will they be able to recover before it happens? Now, when we're not talking about individuals and we start talking about consistency, to me, we start getting much closer and closer and closer to the world of branding. All right. The reason why we pick a brand is we place a premium on something that we know and something that we expect. Regardless of what you think of Apple, there's a certain standard of expectations for this particular device. Regardless of what you... trying to think of something else here. All right, the microphone. You guys may not be familiar with this Blue company. It's hard for me to... I don't know if you can see that or not. But this is a pretty good USB mic. Now, it's only a $100 one. It's not like it's a $300 or $400 one that's, some of the high-end studios would use for recording, shows that make hundreds of thousands of dollars. But I have particular expectations for this particular microphone. I'm looking for consistency. If you go to a hotel chain and you're paying $200 a night, and guess what? There's issues with everything, and the consistency is poor. That has a strong effect on your brand appraisal for that particular service or company. The consistency thing leads straight into branding, in my opinion. Now, individuals, we can still talk as individuals as brands, but this is more similar to what a lot of the other stuff is in the chapter. We are still looking for consistency by individuals. For a company or a service, we're expecting very, very strong consistency. When we go into Nordstrom's, we have a certain threshold for what we expect. If we go into Kohl's, we have a certain threshold for what we expect, right? Wegmans versus Acme. If a company or an individual cannot live up to their initial commitments, what tactics are they able to employ to get them back? Well, usually you have to negotiate, because you need some other small type of yes to get the relationship back on track. You might have to give up an awful lot. You might have to over-reciprocate to get the relationship back on track. I mean, if you keep lying to your roommate and you keep not doing what you're supposed to do, your roommate's gonna never trust you again unless you win them back with some over and above, over the top task to get the relationship back on track. It's not easy. I mean, the further you deviate from the mean of commitment and consistency, the harder it is to get it back on track. To the point where some companies completely start over. I mean, Comcast had a very, very bad brand reputation. So what did they do? They changed the brand. They called it Xfinity. They wanted to start over because it would be harder to rebuild the Comcast brand than it would be to create a new one to start over. Next question. Social media makes it easier than ever to make your commitments more public. You know, when you get to the Made to Stick book, this is a very big deal. Do you think this principle has gotten watered down in recent years with the shift? Now, this particular topic talk was about a bunch of Silicon Valley, rather wealthy individuals making a pledge to donate large percentages of their wealth to nonprofits, basically. Like what Bill Gates is doing, what Warren Buffett is doing, what Mark Zuckerberg is doing. Okay? Do you think this principle has gotten watered down in recent years with the shift? Absolutely, positively not. I think it's easier to make the case that because of social media and because commitments can be more public than ever, you know, in the past, you could tell your coworkers or your family members that you are going to do a diet and you want to lose 15 pounds. If you say that to your entire social graph on Facebook, not a dozen or a dozen and a half people might know about it, but 300 or 400, or think about how many people that you have in your Facebook feed would then know about it. To me, it's actually stronger now, in my opinion. You know, do you go on Facebook and say all kinds of things that you... No. All right, we need to talk about loss aversion, but hold that question. Is there a psychological difference between writing down and entertaining a reminder versus... Is there a difference between writing it down or entering something into a phone? The direct answer is I've never seen any study that distinguishes how you write down that to remain consistent. Whether you physically write it in a to-do list or whether you do it on a phone. To be honest with you, as long as you do it, in my opinion, as long as you do it and you hold yourself to that, whether you hold it yourself to it and you wrote it digitally or you wrote it on a piece of paper, I think the effect's going to be the same. Writing down seems outdated with technology, however, people do less commit. I don't think there's really a difference between whether you use technology or not. I think the act of commitment is more important. Customers and consumers seem less committed than they were in the past. Does this have to do with more variety and product differentiation? So the answer is yes. This is clearly one of my top 10 books in the last 10 years, The Paradox of Choice. He's at Swarthmore, psychology professor, Barry Schwartz. Really, really, really sharp dude. It's harder to stay committed to a particular brand if you have choice beyond choice beyond choice beyond choice. It really is. It's really difficult. I've seen the studies. I've read the literature. That's very much the case. Now, when we talk about loss aversion, I love this book. Professor Kahneman from Princeton is a Nobel Prize winning professor. So to call him a genius would not be an understatement. Well, he won the Nobel Prize based on consistently providing peer-reviewed evidence that consumers or people or humans have a much stronger, what do we call it? Losses are more influential to people than gains. So if you were to have the potential to lose an option, that would have a stronger effect on you than if you were to gain something. It may sound very odd, but trust me, there are thousands of papers written on this since it happened, since 1976-ish. Loss aversion is very, very, very powerful. It's think about it when you're upset. If you go to a restaurant and you have a really bad experience, negative word of mouth is stronger than positive word of mouth. You will tell more people about the bad experience than you will about the good experience. And it's this loss aversion effect. Okay, in the back of the chapter we talk about stomach signs and heart of heart signs. Is there any easier ways to avoid consistency with a poor choice? Now, I got to be perfectly honest with you that he's talking about your gut and he's talking about your heart. It seems weird that a PhD that's relying on peer-reviewed data is basically telling you to listen to your gut. It seems a little weird to me. It always struck me funny that he has this in the text and he's had it in multiple editions of the text. But that's not really the question. Is there any other easy ways to avoid consistency with a poor choice? I think the easiest way to avoid poor choices is to be more patient and to ask other people's opinions, particularly experts. Because most of the time when we make a poor choice, most of our poor choices happen when we rush. When we're uncomfortable and we're forced and we're rushed. 9.9 times out of 10, you make a better decision when you sit on it. You take your time, you weigh your options, you ask other people's opinions, and then in the end, you make a decision, a well-informed decision. When people lie, they are warping their perception of those they interact with to build a consistent yet untruthful persona. Does this mean that your inner self-image and public self-image can differ? If so, is the person motivated to converge the two conflicting personas? All right, as we go through my bookshelf today, it's not this book, Predictably Irrational, but Dan Ariely at Duke wrote an incredible book. I haven't read it yet. An incredible book about why we lie and why people lie. And believe it or not, we tell ourselves the story that the lie doesn't appear to you a lie when you say it to yourself. Almost to the point where it sounds so good that the person who's saying the lie doesn't think they're lying. I don't want to summarize a 200-page peer-reviewed book that quickly, but it's very much like that. Now, something else, the concept of the self, you should know that you do not have one concept of self. You have dozens of self-images that you have. I mean, me, I am a husband. I have a self-image for that. A father, a professor, a soccer coach, a robotics coach, a neighborhood citizen. You can go through the roles that you play and you have a self-image for each one of those. Can some of them differ? Yeah, absolutely, positively. Are they all in complete congruence? Not necessarily. Not necessarily. your image on Sunday morning, your image that you portray on Sunday mornings may be radically different than when you're hanging out with your buddies on Saturday night. You know. A lot of times we do not have a problem with these conflicting personas because the roles or the context or the people that are involved with that image, you know. My kids have never seen me teach. Well, they've seen me do this thing digitally, but they've never seen me on campus at Seton Hall. Their image of me in this house versus the image of me that, you know, they're in elementary school. They probably have some kind of a mental image of what their father does based on what they see in elementary school. People have multiple selves. We all have multiple selves. They are somewhat consistent, but they don't have to be completely consistent. How do you think the U.S. is becoming less harsh with criticism when someone does not show commitment and consistency? Well, we still value commitment and consistency. In general, in society, yes. Now, divorce was more harshly critical in the past. It is now becoming more acceptable. But this is a very slow-moving cultural force. This is 40, 50, 60 years in the making. This is not something that's happened in the last 5 years, for instance. This is not something that's happened during internet time since the mid-90s. Right? This is something that's been happening since the 40s and the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. This is a multi-generational shift. So when you have that over time, you know, a little bit of more opening, just look at some of the big issue things that have happened in the last 10 years. We've had an African American president, right? That was no issue, no problem. The majority of the people in the United States voted for President Obama. And guess what? We're good with it. But if we were to turn the clock back 50 years, we now have a candidate, Hillary, as of probably a couple hours ago, will be the first female candidate from a major party to run for the office of president. And that is starting to become more of a cultural norm and acceptable. Think about, marijuana. You know, for decades, marijuana was, and now people are changing their stance on, the commitment. You have to allow for societal change. It happens gradually over time. But then, it's not a wide shift quickly to have all these big cultural shifts. It's something that's happening little by little by little by little over time. I mean, look what our Pope's doing in Rome. He suggests something. He talks about something. The fact that he's even saying that divorce is something that we can kind of start talking about a little bit here now. He's starting the cultural conversation that will make it more commitment and consistent over time. Have there been studies to determine if there are differences in behaving consistently across cultural, sexes, and social economic boundaries? Okay. So, this book and the majority of literature in this book is predominantly U.S., North American, Western type behaviors. Individualistic cultures. Okay. The majority of it. Now, I'm currently reading this book, which is Steve Martin, Noah Goldstein, and of course, Professor Cialdini. This is basically a very, very up-to-date version of many of these things, and there are a lot more international socio-economic references in here. I mean, for instance, the U.S. played Costa Rica last night. I'm glad that the U.S. had a very good result. I'm taking the kids and my father to the game this Saturday in Philly to see if they can move on to the second round. But Costa Rica consistently is one of the happiest places to be on the planet. Consistently, that is a cultural thing, right? So people in Costa Rica have this zeitgeist mindset, and people within Costa Rica, it's expected for them to have sort of a glass half full attitude the majority of the time. But, there are other countries that, that's just not the case. I have very good friends that are from Russia, and they do not have a glass half full attitude on a majority of things. So there are no questions that there are cultural and social economic factors that influence what that mean is for commitment and consistency. If we're talking about the happiness scale, you would consistently expect Costa Rica to be number one, and they are. You would consistently expect Russia to be a certain spot on that scale and remain relatively in that range over time. Maybe there's been some changes and a shift, but it's not like Russia went from being whatever number they are in the survey to being in the top 10 close to Costa Rica. I just don't see that happening. Is consistent behavior learned or a trait? It's learned. It's absolutely positively learned. It is a socio-cultural learning experience. In other words, are cheats, liars, and con artists predispose these behaviors as a role of lacking the consistency trait? No. You learn to be a cheat, you learn to be a liar, and you learn to be a con artist. They learn how to do or behave this way. Where are they predisposed to be? Okay? So this was part of the topic talk. The question that has led me to R1. If one has made a commitment to a person or an organization, how can they manage the pressure to not affect one's consistently before the commitment? Okay. So basically, this topic talk was about performance. Particularly, I believe this topic talk was about LeBron and how LeBron made a commitment to come back to Cleveland and how he just came back to Cleveland because he wants to bring Cleveland the title. He's made a commitment to Cleveland. Now, in my eyes, whether LeBron, I don't know if he's going to do it in this NBA final series. I mean, Golden State just has a much deeper bench and a much deeper team. The game just started, to be honest with you. His commitment can remain the same, though. What would be weird is for LeBron to make the commitment to try to win in Cleveland. And remember, everybody hated him when he took his talents to South Beach. Remember? LeBron wasn't being consistent then. He broke his commitment to Cleveland. Now, whether he actually wins the title or not, I think is not as important. But what is important is that he leaves everything on the court and he tries to do everything within his power to win the title for Cleveland. That's remaining consistent to his commitment. Lost version. Okay. I think we're good here. Let's go to the next one. After a person subconsciously or consciously commits to something he or she doesn't really want, how is it possible for the consumer to figure out that he or she is getting fooled by a marketing technique as opposed to making a smart decision? Here is the best suggestion for everyone here in class. So, how do you build a defense against all of these techniques? Reciprocity, commitment and consistency, liking. Avoid making the knee-jerk decision. Don't make a decision. That's how you do it. That's how you do it. You can always go back and say yes. But if you say yes quickly, you made the commitment, you're in. It's a lot harder to get out of that scenario. The reciprocity thing, most people feel like they got to return the favor quickly. Well, if you want to avoid that over reciprocity, too much of a valence, if you want to avoid the commitment, if you want to avoid the consistency, wait. Hold them off. Here's a perfect example. I went to Spain, had an incredible experience, my wife and I. We went to the Bernabeu, which is where the Real Madrid team plays. We were trying to get into the stadium. After we got to the stadium, we found out that there were no tickets available because they only sent ticket decisions to existing season ticket holders. I just thought we could just walk up and buy some tickets because this was an event that was planned only with 2 days in advance. And there's no way they were going to sell 80,000 tickets. Well, I was right that they didn't sell 80,000 tickets, but they didn't have any ticket booths open. So we stood outside waiting to see if we could get a set of tickets to get into the stadium to watch the final, the UEFA Cup final. Someone walked up to us, and we let them make offer after offer after offer after offer. I just said nothing. I just stood there blank-faced. I didn't commit. I didn't agree. I never said yes. Nothing. I let them make every possible play they possibly could. They had to. I let them walk away until they would walk back. That's how you avoid all these persuasion techniques. You don't buy in. You don't make a decision. You wait. You wait, you wait, you wait. That's what you should do. Eventually, I ended up getting the tickets, in case you were wondering. But it was 15 minutes. Someone didn't come with me with an offer and I said yes. Someone did. No. They had to talk their way through it for 10 or 15 minutes. I just stood there. With a pleasant look on my face, but that's it. How do you know that those who practice fuel-saving efforts in order to have their name in the paper did not continue to do so after the publication was revoked because of their monetary savings? Now, so this was an example that was in the text. The book is really only speculating they continue to reduce their energy consumption due to their new perception of having commitment to the conversation. Without conducting a survey or some sort of, checking after the facts, how do you know people didn't shirk on their behavior after the fact? Well, some people may have, but we know from peer-reviewed studies on this stuff that the majority, a good percentage, 2/3 or higher, will remain consistent to their commitment. It's just who we are as humans. 100%? Nah. 2/3? Yeah. 75%? Probably yes. 80-20 rule? I'd put money on the 80-20 rule. Yep. Do you agree with Cialdini on the point that consistency increases with ages? Absolutely, 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 absolutely. Look, we get more conservative as we grow older. There's You can't dispute that. It's a fact. We do. We absolutely, positively do. Look, without getting all biological on you, especially the dudes that are listening to this conversation, the amount of testosterone that you had in your body from age 15 to age 25 is not the same amount of testosterone that you have in your body from age 25 to age 35. And it's not the same level of testosterone that you have in your body from age 35 to age 45. There is a biological component to why you mellow out. And as we get older, both men and women, we become more conservative. Ladies, think about the clothes you used to wear when you were in high school and in college. Think about the clothes you wear now. You know? When you were in college, you would see people and say, hey, look, they dress like a mom. And guess what? Consistency increases with age. The other thing with, as we get older, we tend to be less variety seeking in general. We tend to have our patterns, we tend to have our brands, we tend to have our things, and we stray less and less and less from the mean. That is true. That is true. That is true. Every one of us who's listening to this right now, just think about your parents now and think about your parents 20 years ago. All right. We're getting close to the end. This topic talk was about Apple. You guys know I love Apple. It's from Carmine Gallo, who has a number of books that he wrote. A number of them about Apple. A number of them about Steve Jobs. His latest book is about storytelling, which just came out. I haven't seen it yet, but I'm curious because I love storytelling stuff. The book before the storytelling book was Talk Like Ted. And that is an excellent, excellent, excellent book. If you want to work on your verbal communication to be able to nail presentations at work, you get the Talk Like Ted book. Is it always important for companies to provide a consistent message to take advantage of a natural data? This is my comment earlier when I was talking about branding. Companies and brands must stay consistent. It's part of the brand. The consumers expect something from the brand. It has to stay that way. Especially if you're spending that much money for a BMW or an Apple or a Mercedes or Tiffany or Hermes, Rolex. Recent events, consistency has been positive for Apple. However, in the past, Apple's had huge. How does Apple find this is branding. We've talked about this already. We're good. And if I start talking about Apple, we're going to be here for another hour. So we don't want to go there. Do you think it's harder for people to break their consistent routines or fully commit to something? How important is it the way you word something in order to answer what you want? Okay, so there's two questions here. The second question the two words in the literature, one is called priming and one is called framing. All right. You can get someone to commit to something depending on how they're primed or depending on how the argument is framed. Sometimes it may look like something's really expensive. But if you compare it to something that's way more expensive, it's not all that expensive. So what a lot of restaurants do is they have a wine list. And they want you to buy the $15 bottle of wine, which may seem like a lot of money. But when everything else on the menu is either $50, $60, or $100 a bottle, then guess what? Relatively speaking, because of how the wine list is framed, something seems more like you should, they could behaviorally nudge you in a direction. Now prime is I can prime you to think about something. So if we're talking about food and I keep saying yellow, 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 and I'm talking about food, the only yellow food you can think of is a banana. Even before I said yellow, yellow, food, food, yellow, 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 in your head you were already thinking banana. There is not another yellow food you could have thought of that quickly. You were primed. It's a really good book. Not an easy read, but a really good book. Do you think it's hard for people to break their consistent routines or to fully commit to something? It's very, very hard for people to break habits. And, this book's going to be harder to get out. Let me do it quickly. Really, really good book. The Power of Habit. And he literally said it's somewhere between 4 to 6 to 8 weeks to break a routine to get you into a new routine where you don't think about it anymore. Like every morning, your coffee routine that you can almost do without sleeping. Well, that's why losing weight is such a hard thing to do, because it really is a 2 to 3 month deal before you get into a habit and a consistent routine. 3 months. Forget about how much weight you may lose or not lose. Just the habit of working out is a 2 to 3 month deal before it gets locked in. Okay? I hope this was helpful. You guys had a lot of good questions. To do a little bit of foreshadowing, of the 6 modules, reciprocity might be number 1 of the 4 to 6 of the 6 modules. Commitment consistency might be number either 5 or 6. There are more really awesome ones to come. Think about it. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your energy. Shoot me questions.